items before we get started. For those of you who may be new to the Mom Project, we are a digital talent marketplace and community where you can realize your full potential, both as a professional and as a mom. Through our marketplace, we connect you with job opportunities at family-friendly companies that allow you to thrive at work and at home. And through our community, we provide you with the support, tools, and resources like today's event you need to keep moving forward in your career journey. We hope many of you followed along with our summer school, the Remix campaign, and are joining us today. And we're really thrilled to have this event wrap up the whole series. For those who weren't able to follow along, we will drop the link to the whole summer school, the Remix campaign in the chat so you can unlock all the goodies that went out over the past 12 weeks and go through the curriculum on your own time. But we're really excited to kind of end this whole wonderful campaign with this week's focus, make your move. And this event, this session today really just ties into that perfectly. So we're thrilled to welcome back our resident return to work expert, Susan and Kelley, as we dig into one of the most intimidating parts of the job search process, the interview stage. And as returners, this can be an especially intimidating thing to kind of approach. So we're going to go through a bit of content in the beginning. We'll leave a ton of time at the end for Q&A, but please feel free to drop in any and all questions you have in the chat as they come up in real time, and we'll bubble them up. If anybody has to drop off, don't worry, we will send an email after this with a recording so you can watch on your own time, and also details around how to get connected with Susan and Kelley on your own. So after all that, I'm going to pass the mic to Susan and Kelley. Thank you both.
Well, Kelley's going to set up the screen. Yes. While we're doing that, before we forget though, we want to tell anybody who's watching the recording, please, you'll get an email from the Mom Project, probably dated today, with links to all the materials that we're going to be sending you. So don't delete that. If you're watching the recording, even if you're watching it next week, keep that email so you have access to the materials that we're going to cover today. So I'm Susan. This is Kelley.
I'm Kelley, and I'm just trying to see where my button is.
There you go.
Slideshow.
So our company is an online learning company, actually online and live, that guides women through important work-life transitions. And the transition that we've both experienced ourselves, and many of you, by virtue of being here, is that
we are living currently.
That's right, with children around, is the return to work. So today we want to talk specifically about how to nail an interview. And as Katie kind of set it up really well, it can be interviews are intimidating anyway.
Right.
You could be a seasoned exec and it's still an intimidating process, but add to that the fact that you've been out for a while and you're just may be feeling like it's daunting. So we're going to break it down for you.
Yeah, we're going to break it down for you and give you some really helpful tips that you can walk away with today in your back pocket. So just a little bit about ourselves, our personal selves.
Yeah.
We're both moms of 4.
And we've both taken career breaks and opted back into work.
And we have a combined 30 years of experience interviewing candidates.
We need to update that. It's probably like 33 now. We've also been interviewed countless times while growing our business. So we've got that experience on both ends of the table.
Yeah.
And today, we just want to help you with some concrete tips that you can put into practice right away.
Right. So in this Mom Project Masterclass, what we're going to do is we're going to explain today's different interview modalities. There are many.
And they're being introduced all the time.
I'm just going to push myself up here because I'm the clicker today.
There you go. I know. It's so weird. We're explaining the essential premise of an interview, which sounds like it should be pretty obvious, but I'm always shocked. We're always shocked at how many people don't really get what it's supposed to be in the first place.
Right. And then we're going to teach you 3 specific interview tactics that you can use to begin, that you can use immediately.
Yeah.
And I think they're going to be really helpful. And there might be a bonus one in there too.
There might be.
Because I can't.
Well, I have 10, but Kelley said you can't give away the store. So I'm only giving you 3 plus there is a bonus. And we're going to answer your questions. So as Katie said, because this particular masterclass is pretty narrowly focused, I think we'll have ample time at the end to answer your questions. So you can write them in the chat or just write them down and answer them later. We also, thank you, Ariana, have a list of questions that you submitted earlier. We'll make sure that we cover all of those as well. So let's just start with talking about what is an interview.
Yeah. So an interview is just a person. So it's when a person is looking to hire a new team member and they meet with each other and
you're meeting with the person who wants this. It's really 2 people buying and 2 people selling. And that's the really interesting piece of it, because most interviews feel like if I'm the candidate, I've got to go in there and pitch myself. And it's all that. They're interrogating me. They're asking me all the questions. It's all on me, but it's not. And my favorite line always, this is the Susan line, an interview is a conversation. It is not an interrogation.
Mm-hmm.
So if you can just internalize that message, that means that you are showing up at the interview with your questions too,
Right.
that you are getting information from that company as well, or that person representing the company as well.
Yeah. So where and by whom will you be interviewed? This is a really interesting question in this day and age. So
ideally by a human or humans, if it's a panel interview, that could be a recruiter. The recruiter could be an employee of the company or a contractor who's an intermediary. A team member, maybe a peer that you might work with, a hiring manager, sometimes a couple levels up from the hiring manager. And it can be done one-on-one or in a panel. It can be done in person. Hopefully we're getting a little bit more of that. Still a lot of early stage interviews are done on a screen via Zoom or Google Meet. Often a very first interview is just done on the phone, and sometimes it's done just by email. So nowadays it's not uncommon for a first round, I've even seen it happen with a second round interview, to be a series of questions that you then have to type your answers to and submit.
And by a bot. This is actually happening for a lot of our graduates of our program right now. We're hearing that this is the norm, the new norm.
So there are a couple of ways that can take place. One is literally you are on a Zoom interview, you're being videoed, the interaction is being filmed or recorded, and the person on the other side is a robot that may have human features, but that bot is trained to recognize intonation, speed of answers, length of answers, read body and facial expression. Really weird. It's not highly common, but it is absolutely being used, and it's definitely regional. So if you're in SoCal, or not SoCal, but Silicon Valley area, you're going to see that happening more than you would say in the Midwest. But there are other ways that companies use bots to interview you.
Right.
So sometimes you have an interactive assessment that you're taking that's being read through an algorithm. Your results are being read that way. Even some of the search engines, like Indeed now has testing. I was working with a private client and she was doing the application, and then she said, "Oh my God, I've got to take a test." I was sitting next to her. I was like, "Oh my God, it's like an SAT all over again," 30 years later or more.
Yeah.
So lots of different ways. So you've got to be comfortable and able to navigate these different ways of interviewing.
Well, and just, I think the way to get to that comfort is to just be educated about the fact that these are things that are out there. And so do a bit of research and get an understanding. Is the company I'm interviewing with, are these going to be interview options that I might experience? And that just the knowledge and not going into it cold, having that knowledge is going to empower you and make you feel a bit more comfortable. It's not a comfortable process. So we said that already, but just having a better understanding of what is coming your way, we all know can just bring down that anxiety level a little bit.
And there are a couple advantages to the kind of virtual world. I mean, if you're on a phone interview, you can have, we tell our students all the time, have your notebook handy, have all of your notes, have those things you want to make sure that you say in like bold print, have your questions written down so you know what to ask. If you're doing a Zoom interview or a Google Meets interview, we're big fans of having a couple of sticky notes on either sides of your screen, just to give you some prompting. So there are some advantages. If you're in a face-to-face interview, the way to get around that is to bring a little portfolio and act like you're taking notes when you're really just scribbling and reading what you're supposed to be saying. You're trying to remember what to say.
Yeah.
So,
and even some of our students that are going through the process right now in the return, they don't want to see themselves when they're doing a virtual interview. So they put a little sticky note over the camera so they're not seeing themselves, because that can be really distracting. If you have that one hair that's like out of place, it's like I'm just fixated on that. So
that's why I'm not looking at myself today.
We're just gonna pretend. I had a toddler that was up late last night. Okay. So we want to just spend a little bit of time talking about your mindset, because your mindset is a huge piece of what's going to make or break you on an interview. It can hold you back and stand in your way and become a saboteur, or it can propel you forward and make you have that much more of an impact so that you are memorable and you are somebody who this company or corporation wants to have. And let's just say this because we work with women like you on the daily basis and have like probably close to 1,000 women that we've worked with now that have had this gap. The workforce is lucky to have you, and you need to start to embrace that mindset. You have a ton of experience that has happened in these gap years. And we have a bunch of other webinars that we have done that you might want to go back and watch if you are just new to Susan and I. But the reality is you have so much to bring to the table, and you need to walk in there, be it in front of your computer or into an actual interview room, knowing that you are there and they're lucky that you're there. So I just have to say it like that. First, I gotta get my soapbox a little bit, but I want you to all hear that, understand that, and know that you have a wisdom and an understanding about life that the workplace needs. Okay. So, I have something great to offer. I already did.
But there's a point there.
Yeah.
It's not just, I have something great to offer. Make sure you know what that offer is.
Yeah.
Part of being effective in an interview is really understanding your brand.
Yes.
And we're not sure where all of you are who are watching this. Our students, by the time they just started week 8 of our program, and they're just starting interview right now. So there's a lot of time preparing them.
Yeah.
So just make sure you know what your offer is and you're able to articulate it clearly and somewhat briefly.
Yeah. Years ago, I went to a women's conference in Boston, and there was a woman there, Charlotte Bears,
Yeah.
and she spoke specifically about this. She was, if you don't know who Charlotte Bears is, she was kind of a mover and a shaker in the 50s in marketing and advertising. Yeah. So she was in like all male environments, marketing and advertising. She actually went on to be the CEO, and she was the undersecretary for Colin Powell. I mean, she's done it all. Well, she was up on this stage, and she had this moment where you could have heard a pin drop in this women's conference. And she said in that moment, know who you are. Know who you are, because when you do, you are believable, you're believable, memorable, and you have the power of impact and influence. And I remember thinking to myself, like, yes, like, we really, like, I need to know who I am. This is kind of a part of my back to work journey. And then I thought to myself as I was driving home, like, yeah, Charlotte, that's great, but where in my busy life do I have time to really think about that? So if that's you right now, who doesn't really have a clear understanding and an articulation that you can, that can come out of your mouth about who you are, spend some time there. Spend some time really thinking about, who am I now? What is my brand? What are my strengths? That's an important thing.
And why would they be lucky to have me on the team?
And why? Yes.
This is a piece that doesn't always happen.
Right.
It's okay. So now I know what my brand is. I know what my offer is. I know what I can bring. I'm going to sit here and I'm going to pitch it to you. But the other piece of that is, what do I need from you?
Yes.
This is what I need from you. I need this level of pay, this level of authority or responsibility, this kind of an office, or this kind of a work arrangement, whatever it is. Really spending some time to talk about with yourself, what do I need them to offer me?
Yes. Yeah, very important.
That's the other half of the bargain.
Yep. Oops.
Oh, that last one.
Oh, sorry, missed it. Sorry. Oh, I don't know. Yeah. Okay, there we go. Okay.
I have other options.
Yeah.
So let me just tell you how this plays out. If you have other options, you may not think you do. Everybody has other options, but it would be hard for you to go into an interview and say, well, gee, I have other options, or I'm working on other jobs, and you're not. But our general rule is, if you have an application out in the atmosphere somewhere in an algorithm, you are
entertaining other options.
Exactly. Not other offers, but other options. So it's just something good to drop into the conversation. Practice saying it. But also, this is another one, you have to believe it. You have to believe that you have other options. So the more options you are actively pursuing, even if they're not at the offer stage, the more you're going to feel comfortable demanding something from the person on the other side of the desk. If you have only one company where you've applied and one interview, you're not in a position of power. So you owe it to yourself always. I always say to our students, you don't stop looking for a job until you've already started and gotten your first paycheck, because there are things that can happen in the process. But all of that, continuing to connect, interview, network, all those things are big confidence boosts, but they also make you believe and then be able to say convincingly, actually, I'm really looking at a number of options right now.
Yeah, that is the inroad to the mindset that allows you to say, I have other options. And you do. So we want you to think that way. All right. So let's get into the actual tips, because that's really what you're probably all here for. So the first tip, and I love this, this is something that we teach, and it's called acknowledge and pivot. And Suze, you want to just kind of really...
Yeah. So I find that, I mean, some interviewers will ask these questions very innocently, but sometimes they're asking it to get you off your game. Just depends on, how fragile their own ego is.
Well, and we did in the questions we had, like, how do I answer why I left the workforce and why I'm returning?
Right.
Another one was, what's the best way to talk about a career gap in an interview? So
we're going to get to that a little bit more here. What I want to focus on is kind of that question that you dread. So for instance, you might have an interviewer try to pigeonhole you as a PTO mom or as a hockey mom. So the way the question could play out is, the question might be, so Kelley, I see that you're a hockey mom. And the first step is to acknowledge it confidently and say, actually, yeah, I am. So one of the questions we got is, well, do I acknowledge my gap? Yeah, they're going to know that you have been off, because no matter how you wordsmith it, I know that if you went from being a trader on a desk at Goldman and now you're working for the Simsbury Public Schools, that's something, you've done something different. I mean, we're not stupid reading your resume. So don't belabor it. Yep, I was a hockey mom. And then you pivot. Now you're going to take that, yep, I'm a hockey mom, and you're going to show it as an advantage. You cannot do this on the fly. These are things you have to prepare. So this would be a good response. Yep, I was a hockey mom. I actually used my time at the rink to automate the club's financials using QuickBooks, and then I streamlined their scheduling using Snap. So now I've done a couple of things. I've shown you that I wasn't just sitting there buffing my nails. I was actually working. I was using tools that are valuable to your organization, and I'm showing confidence. Nobody wants to hire someone who doesn't have confidence. And I think that's the last bullet there. You want to just check?
Yeah, it is.
Okay, good. All right, so acknowledge and pivot. And everything we're teaching you today is going to be captured in a little template we're providing for you with some examples.
Yeah, so that you can kind of take that. And so if you are preparing for an interview, you can read that before you actually go on the interview.
And so I want to
remind yourself.
Also just kind of thread back to one of these questions. So when you talk about your gap, that's how you talk about it. You talk about what you did that was meaningful. Now we have had students, we had Roseanne, for example, who's like our star student of the week. She had been home for 18 years with preemie, what were they called? Micro preemie twins. So they were like, weren't even supposed to live. She's a single mom living in a new state across the country, no network, and she's going back to work. And she just came and she was like, and she found us through the Mom Project. She's like, nothing's ever going to work for me. Well, it did. She just landed an awesome job in tech, even though she's not techie at all, as a manager. But
they are so lucky to have her.
And she's killing it. But what was interesting was when she was doing her resume, she's like, I don't really have a lot to write because all I was doing was taking care of these kids because I was a single mom and trying to advocate for them in the schools. But once we got talking to her, we realized that the advocacy work she was doing for her twins, she was doing for everyone. She actually got brought into like an unpaid but formal advocacy role where she was talking to the Chicago public school system about how to meet the needs of children that had kind of more subtle learning disabilities, not because they were meeting the needs of the kids who were profoundly disabled, but not those kids in the middle. And she was on task forces and she was in a hiring committee. And so basically she just boldly put, for the years that she was out, Chicago public schools. I think she put maybe 8 or 10 years there. And she talked about what she did. Now,
when an interview, how does that play out?
She owned it. When they said, well, we're going to get to that in the next one. That's the third one. So hold that in your heads because we're going to get to that. I'm going to give that kind of flesh out that example in a moment. So the second tip is really important. And this is what my kids learned in 2nd grade. Show, don't tell.
Yeah. We see this all the time where we just kind of, are talking at or
listing adjectives. Well, I'm goal-oriented and I'm great under pressure and I'm calm in chaos and all those things. That doesn't mean anything. We were just talking, we just had a call with our students, and it's really easy to get down on recruiters and hiring managers because half the time you never hear from them. They might not be prepared when they meet with you, but having been on the other side of the desk, I'm really sensitive to their task because it's really quite Herculean now because they've got, maybe 1,000 average applicants for a job, depending on the level, fewer at the top. That's a lot of people to screen.
Right.
That's a lot of people to try to look at and stay interested. And a typical recruiter might have 40 or 50 interviews a week.
Right.
I mean, 10 a day. Imagine just sitting through interview after interview. If you can, just like to use your Charlotte Beers example, if you can make yourself memorable by telling a story,
Yes.
you're just giving yourself such an advantage. Because I might not remember your name, but I'll say, Kelley, I remember, oh, she was the one that told me that great story.
Yeah.
Years ago, I had a private client who came to me, and she was doing we were practicing for interviews, and she was like, well, I'm really going to really calm under pressure. And I was like, well, give me an example. Now, I had been working with her for about a month, so I'd met with her maybe 4 times. And she tells me this story about how she had been working down in Lower Manhattan on 9/11. And at the time, she was a second-year HR rep for a major hospital. And on that day, she had to really put her big girl pants on, and she was talking to families and telling them about loss of family members. They trained her to do triage. They were giving her like gauze tape and bandages and wipes to clean people up. She was dragging body bags out of the back of the hospital at 26 years old. No one will ever forget that story. So just think about what are your stories that you can tell to answer those questions, and show me that you're calm under pressure. Don't tell me. Okay. So not only do they make you memorable, but they do keep your interviewer interested. The story you tell, you should be the hero. So don't ever tell the story and makes the guy next to you being the guy that's doing all the stuff that was cool. It's you.
And this is something that we often as women can tend to do, that it was somebody else who did it, or I was a part of a team that did it. And you really want to be bold. You actually may feel that you're outside your comfort zone when you're talking about yourself in this way. It is absolutely needed and necessary, because we need to hear who you are, and we need you to show us who you are.
I don't need to hear about the guy you worked with. I'm not interviewing him. I'm interviewing you. Right. Practice ahead of time. This is important. So one of the things we teach in our course is actually a storytelling lesson on how you craft your story. Kind of the Reader's Digest version is know what the stories are, practice them ahead of time. It's very helpful to write them out.
Yes.
And then, what's that called? Kinesthetic learning, when you're kind of like physically writing it. So you get that, it's kind of more ingrained in your memory.
Yeah. And it brings it to life. It really brings it to life. And when you're doing that, when you're sort of mining for the stories that are going to have that impact, that are going to make you memorable, you want to be talking to people in your life about that. You want to be talking to maybe old colleagues that you worked with in the past.
Yeah. Like, do you have a memory of when I was really great under pressure? Sometimes you don't remember those stories yourself.
Right.
Include those interesting details. I mean, I know that the story that this woman, Patricia, told me was quite graphic, but I still remember 1,000 people later, that vision of this little 26-year-old girl dragging body bags out of the back of a hospital in the smoke. You can't forget that.
Right.
And conflate and compress as necessary. So that might mean that there might be absolutely everything you tell should be truthful. Let's be very clear about that. But you might have 2 stories that are kind of similar, but you like details from this story and details from that one. It's fine to conflate them into one story. It's also okay to compress a timeline. So it may have happened over 9 months, but you want to just kind of accelerate the process of the story. You can do that too, just to make it a little bit more interesting. And then follow this storytelling model. Now, many of you have probably heard of the STAR technique: situation, task, activity, and result. That's fine. It's a good mnemonic device to remember, but I don't really think it's the best, because it doesn't really take the second step, which is the most important. So the first is the problem. This is the problem that I was dealing with. The second is the stakes. That's the context. So this problem existed, but what were the stakes of that problem? What were the possible results of that problem not being resolved? That's a really important piece to have in there. And then now your action. What did you do to fix it? And what was the outcome? Who was happy? Whose life was saved? What deal was delivered or closed? What client was saved from canceling? Make sure that you take that story from the beginning and follow that whole arc through. Right. So if you want to use STAR, that's fine. I just find that ours doesn't have a cute little device attached to it, but the stakes piece is really important.
And I want to just make a comment here. So when you are mining for your stories, when you're determining what your stories are, you want to have Some stories that are from your opt-out years that actually show you as the hero. You want to have those moments in there. And then you also want to have from your former career or your past, your career before you took your career break. You want to pull from both, so that from that professional side, but then also from professional opportunities that may have happened during volunteer experiences that you have had, from family, or just the setup of your household in terms of, did you have a child with special needs like a Roseanne, and how she spent her time and energy, and how that is something that can translate to the workplace. So you want to mine for stories on both
fronts.
Yeah.
But you bring up a good point, because I'm thinking of Linda from Seattle. So we had a client, I think she was out for 22 years, a student of ours. And she was like, I feel like I have great answers, but it was 22 years ago.
Right.
So you can sometimes refer back. And the way we scripted it for her was to say, the example I think was, can you give me an example of leadership? And she wanted to remind them that she had been a national account exec for Xerox, running all of their, I think she had handled all of the automotive industry at the time. This was in the 90s. So it was, really big accounts. A lot of the manufacturing was done here still. And she said something, we scripted it for her, but it's basically, she referenced it to remind them where she cut her chops, but then she gave them a more current example. Because there is a risk of saying that your leadership example happened 22 years ago.
So I actually want you to say that for them so that they understand
like how you
what
do
you
it.
mean. Yeah. So.
Okay. So basically, I'll be Linda. She said, well, obviously I could give you some great examples of my leadership back when I was the national account exec for all automotive industry for Xerox, and equipped all of those major corporate offices with all of their printing, computing, and copying equipment. I could certainly tell you that, but it was a long time ago. I actually think a better example, and in some ways, or more recent example, but in some ways, maybe even a better example, because it was tougher, because I was not dealing with paid employees. I was dealing with volunteers. When I ran the development office for the United Way in our area, and we had a real task in place because we were dealing with some major offshoots from wildfires. I forget what this story was. And then she goes on to explain the leadership of pulling in volunteers, getting people to do things outside of their comfort zones, working without a budget. But she reminded them who she was, where she came from, and then gave them a current example. So it's kind of like reach back, but then step back into the present.
So it's, here is who I could go here. I could tell you that story. But
and you kind of tell a little of it.
Yeah, you tell a little bit of it because you want them to know, like, I have street cred here.
Yeah.
And here is the today, here is what's happened recently and something that I've done. And actually, in my opinion, was probably a little bit more difficult to do. So that's just a good little tip. All right. So this is where you want to tell.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is such a powerful tip. So really listen. And it's introducing the elephant in the room. And what is the elephant in the room?
The elephant in the room is that you took a 15-year career break.
Right.
And this is contradictory to probably anything you've ever heard. It's probably counterintuitive for some of you, and you will probably talk to other instructors and coaches who say it's wrong. We
don't believe that. And actually, and I want to say something about that, because I want to give us some street cred here. Our students are landing job after job after job, and they are using this. So this works.
So having been in, corporate America, where I did my own hiring, having worked in placement, my last company, I can tell you that if I don't notice the elephant in the room on your resume and I don't bring it up, it could be one of two things. Or if I don't bring it up, it's one of two reasons. One is I didn't really read your resume, so I don't know. All that means is I'm going to figure it out later. Or number two, I read it and I'm not even going to consider you. I'm going through the motions because this is a big deal. And if I don't even ask you to clarify it, then I'm really not interested. So you have a choice. You can sit in the interview and wait to see if and when I'm going to ask that question, and panic the whole time, and the whole time be consumed with, oh my God, he's going to ask me about my break and what am I going to say, what am I going to say?
And it's not even necessarily in the interview. It's like when you leave the interview and then you're riding home, and then the next morning when you wake up, and then the week later when you don't get the response email yet, you're saying, well, it must be the gap. It must be the gap. And that's probably what the problem was. So let's take the power back. Let's take control of the situation, right?
And the nice thing about doing it this way is that you get it over with early, and you control the narrative. and you get it all out really early. So we're going to give you 2 examples. Let's just walk through how it works.
Yeah.
So start out with, like, if they say, tell me about yourself, you might even start as boldly say, you might have noticed that. So if your biggest concern is that you've got this career gap, or maybe it's that you've job hopped because you've had to move a lot. We have a whole program we do with military spouses, and that's their biggest problem.
Yeah.
They can't get any career traction because they move every 2 years. Or maybe it's because the last couple of jobs have been kind of sub jobs for you. You've been underemployed because so you don't have a gap, but you've been working as a paraprofessional, or you've been working in retail because that worked for your family. Whatever it is that you are most worried about, you're going to take control. So let's play out the gap. Well, you probably noticed that I left my job at GM, and I've done some other work in between, some gig work, but I took that job. Job because I took a temporary career break to care for my family. Temporary. This is the really important part. I don't think most people who haven't taken a career break like we have and you have know what a tough decision it is. When I took my career break after my first son was born, I had just been offered an awesome job. I mean, it was way beyond what I ever thought I'd be offered. I was being very clearly fast-tracked at a time when there weren't a lot of women in tech. This is in the 90s. And I was a woman, and I was, had a pulse, and I was doing pretty well, right? So I had this awesome opportunity. It was a really hard decision for me to quit. But I had it was all or nothing option for me, and I chose to stop working. Important to say that, because I think what people hear and when I just demonstrated that is that my passion for the work and that I was something, and I made a decision to step back. So it was a really tough decision because I was fast tracking at HP, but I'm glad I did it. As you can see, however, I put my financial skills to good use on a number of boards. And I'm particularly proud of bringing 2 of them into the black after years of financial mismanagement. So it's a little bit of acknowledge and pivot, but you're controlling the whole narrative. So now, instead of talking about all the 20 years I was out, I'm just talking about I took a temporary break. It was a really tough decision because I was a rock star. But I ended up taking all that skill and doing all these great things for my community. And now I'm here. You could take it even further if this were just that first question. And now I'm here. I'm so excited to work with the Mom Project to bring my experience handling major accounts back from my tech days to all of my financial skills that I've developed using all the current tools. I mean, I'm really advanced in Excel, love working around QuickBooks. I love working with numbers. So excited to be here today. And the best part of it is all those things that I stayed home for are intact. My kids are self-sufficient. I'm ready to really dig in.
Yeah. And hear this piece of this too. You have to practice this. This is not something that you're going to say, oh, I was on the Mom Project webinar and they told me to talk about the elephant in the room, and you're just going to do it on the fly on an interview completely unpracticed. This is another place where you should write it down. You should script it for yourself. You should be really comfortable with the language and what you're saying and when you're saying it, so that it can roll off your tongue when you get in that interview. And that's going to give you even more confidence to feel in control of what's happening. You do not want to do this just on the fly because you heard this as a tip. You want this to be practice.
You know, one of the things I say to my kids all the time is, it's not what you say, it's how you say it, right? I mean, but it's so true in this particular case.
Oh my gosh, with teenagers,
I know.
yes.
It's like the constant. Yeah. So, but it's true here too. And I think of that story I teach when I talk about Eric. Yeah. One of my best hires way back when was a guy named Eric. And I asked him a question about who his hero was. And he was this big guy, and he leans over the desk and he looks me right in the eyes. He's in Mississippi. He goes, Jesus Christ. Said it just like that. Now, he didn't know if I was atheist or Jewish or Muslim or anything, but he said that. And
with such confidence.
I didn't care what he said. He could have said Bozo the clown, but he said it with such confidence. That's why I hired him.
Yeah.
And he was an awesome hire. So this is the same thing.
Yep.
Yes, it helps that you're controlling the narrative and you're telling the story. But when you say it with confidence, suddenly their lack of confidence in your gap is transformed. Like, oh, wow.
Right.
Because they're not expecting that. They're expecting you to come in apologizing. We do a whole lesson on that. Apologizing and thank you in your way all the way through it. No, you're not doing that.
No.
You made a really thoughtful decision. That was a hard decision because you're a great employee. And now you're back, and aren't they lucky that you're sitting on the other side of that desk?
Exactly.
Or screen.
Exactly. Exactly. So of course,
Okay,
there's a bonus. There's a bonus tip.
Well, there's a bonus.
Well,
because
she's like,
said-
I am not talking about interview because we were trying to keep it to 3. That's really the reality. We were trying to keep it to 3 because we knew we had a limited amount of time, which we're doing okay on time. But she was like, we have to talk about the close.
Yeah, I mean,
it's the 1-2 close. So really listen to this strategy of closing an interview.
Too. It's so easy, but most of you won't do it. I'm just telling you right now. But
maybe they will.
But maybe they will. But most of them won't, because it is a little hard.
Okay.
This is another thing to your point that they should practice. The close is the way you close that interview. So I didn't tell you this. I had an interview with a very senior level guy at a very, very prestigious university, like really prestigious. And he was applying for for a job at an equally prestigious but different university. And he's a lobbyist. He's the government relations guy. So I'm on the screen with him, and I said, and I didn't want to insult him because he's, lobbying is sales, so I'm sure he knows how to close. And I said, Kurt, I don't want to, insult you or anything, but I would like to just take the last couple of minutes to talk about closing, because I think I know you know all about it, but it's something that we should talk about. I said, so let's practice close me on this interview. So he's asked me what the next steps on the interview are and when I'm going to hear from him, or he's going to hear from me. And then he was done. I was like, oh my God, I can't believe this guy doesn't know how to close. So if you don't know how to close, you're not the only one. The close is your payback. So think about all you invest in every interview.
Right.
I mean, it could be as many as these things. Certainly all the time that you're researching the company, stalking all of them on LinkedIn, so you know everybody's background. You're on Glassdoor, finding out more about the company. You're reading up on their competitors, so you understand the industry. So there's that time.
You are making sure your children, your spouse, everyone,
the dog
that could be distracting you, are tied up somewhere and busy, and and you maybe
bought you maybe bought a new shirt. Maybe you got a blowout. You have spent a lot of time, and if you monetize it, probably hundreds of dollars just to be there, either physically or on the other side of that screen. So you are not walking away with nothing. You're walking away with information. That's the only thing that this close is asking of that interviewer, is to give you some information.
The other thing it is giving you is when you put your head on the pillow that night, you know what is happening. You know where you stand. That is, we see this all the time with our students, where they are just circling.
I should have done that. I'm sure it was because of this. I screwed this up. They didn't
Well, I'm not, I'm thinking maybe I didn't hear back from them because of this, or I think maybe I didn't hear back because of that. Well, now it's because of this. And that you start down this narrative and this story that can take all your power away.
Yeah, because it's always your fault.
And we don't want that to happen for you. We want you to feel clear. It may sting. You may get stung here, but it's worth it because at least you know what's happening.
And that's what I said to Kurt. I said, so right now, all you know is that you're going to hear from me in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Like, what is that? Who cares? I mean, it's so easy not to follow through on. So this is how you actually handle it. The first thing, you're going to ask any remaining questions you have. Don't ask questions just to ask questions. Don't save all of your questions about the job or the company or the culture for the end. Ask them as part of that dialogue. So that very first point, the interview is a conversation, not an interrogation. It's an interrogation if you sit there and answer all their questions and at the end say, okay, now I have some questions for you. That's not how we talk.
Right.
We interact. So if they're talking about, it's our company policy to really invest in employee education, you might ask a question about that right then. Don't wait until the end. That's like very, very amateur. So if you have any remaining questions, ask them now. And then you're going to ask this first question. It's only 2 things. Can you please explain the next steps in the hiring process? And then the person's going to tell you, well, Susan, in 2 weeks, we're going to meet, we're going to review all the candidates, and then we'll choose 5 to move on. Most people ask question 1.
Absolutely.
Question 2, based on our conversation today, Kelley, do you feel comfortable recommending me for that next step? This is the power question. That's the close.
Yeah.
The other one's setting up the close. That's the close.
Yeah.
So it can go one of 3 ways. She could be blown away. Renata just had this happen. We just had one of our students talk in the graduate chat.
Yes.
She said, I closed, and the woman said, absolutely, you will be seeing us again. You are top of my list. Yeah. So that's like the dream outcome. Then there's the worst outcome. No, Susan, I don't like you. Right. Or, no, just no.
But sometimes it's kind of like this in between.
It's usually in between.
Yeah. It's more of like, no, I need some time to think about what the next, the next
Or I
steps.
need to, or it's usually, I haven't interviewed everybody. I'm not sure yet.
But at least you have an understanding of, because maybe you could get that yes in that moment that you're going to get passed on, and that's going to give you some, some peace of mind.
But if you get that maybe,
yeah,
and you really want to be a really good closer, then you go back and say, you know what, Katie, I totally understand. I mean, you have other candidates. It's understandable for sure. But based on our conversation today, is there any reason you wouldn't recommend me for the next step? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Any one of those answers that you get is better than walking away with nothing at all.
Right.
And that's what my client, Kurt, was ready to do.
Right.
Senior rock star lobbyist was going to walk away with no information.
Right.
We don't want you doing that. Yeah. So the other thing we want you to, because we say about show, don't tell, when you're in an interview, it's your opportunity to show your skills. So if you're interviewing for a job that requires you to be on stage, you better well be animated and engaging and interesting, because that's your job.
Right.
And if you're any job that requires you to negotiate, and that could mean recruiter, procurement, purchasing, any type of sales, marketing, market research, really anything. I can't think of very many jobs where you don't have to sell at some point. Demonstrating that is such a powerful thing.
Right.
Because I want you on my team. I know that you're not going to get bowled over by our vendors when they try to give you a price increase, because you're a good negotiator. And I know that when you're hiring people, you're going to be really shrewd at finding me the best talent and negotiating that with them for the best deal.
Right. Right. Mm-hmm. So
I think that was it.
Yeah.
That's it. Oh, here we go.
Yeah. Okay.
Look at that. It's like the best we've ever done, Katie.
27
or 17 minutes. So if you want any more information, www.preparetolaunchu is our website. There's tons of free content on there. We're also on LinkedIn and Facebook and Instagram. You can find us there. Twitter, kind of. Now that we're working with Twitter, we're on there a little bit more. We also have a career relaunch course that we offer 4 times a year. What you've just gotten is a piece of it, kind of a little subset of what we teach in interviewing. If you are a career relauncher and you want to check it out, we have an information session next Thursday. And in the email that you get from the Mom Project, you'll get a template which teaches you and gives examples of these tips, really important. And then also gives you a link to this registration session. And if you're watching the recording, just make sure you go back and find that email from the Mom Project, because everybody who registered got it.
Right.
All right, how are we doing on our questions here?
We did good, but we had a question about how to handle a panel interview.
Yeah, okay. I love panels. Yeah. So when you're working with a panel, you've got multiple people on the screen, or when it's on the screen, it doesn't really matter, because you always look like you're looking at the person you're talking to, as long as you're looking at the light. Like right now, you probably all think I'm looking at you, but I'm really just looking at a green light because I can't see you. But in a physical panel, the way to handle it best is the person who asks the question gets the first beginning of the response, but you do not just answer to them. You look at the other people. Right. So the general rule is you open your answer looking at the person who asked it, and then you progress looking at all of them, and then you end maybe by looking at them or testing to make sure that you've answered the question satisfactorily.
Okay. This is a good one. I've been freelancing for 5 years and want to get back into full-time corporate role. How can I best explain why I want to make this change without sounding desperate?
Right.
Well, hopefully your mindset and doing that work is going to help you with that. But yeah.
But you're probably, I mean, the reality is gig work is tough. It's feast or famine. You might be feeling feast or famine, or you might be feeling feast and just overwhelmed and not being able to say no to any work. So it is smart to think about that, because it could be perceived as, well, she's not doing well, that's why she wants to work in-house. I think the best way to handle that is to say something like this. And again, this might be the elephant in the room that you lead with. Yep. Well, you can see from my resume that I've been doing freelance work and I really love it. I love the variety of the work. But what I don't like is I can never see the fruits of my labor. They bring me in to, whether it's do a financial audit or create some messaging for their marketing team, whatever it is. And then I'm out. I don't get to really see it through. And I've realized that looking back, as much as I enjoy the creative flexibility and the variety of the freelance work, I'm really more satisfied, and I think even more impactful when I'm part of the team that really sees the work all the way through.
Right. So there's no desperation in that. That's just my passion coming through, and you're going to benefit from that.
And even saying something like, I've realized that I'm actually better because as a freelancer, I can create good content. I'm really good at that. But one of my strengths is leadership. And I can't really lead. I can lead on my little piece of the project, but I want to lead on the greater project and see things through.
Right.
That's why I'm here.
Yeah. So here's a question. Is it okay to include volunteer work as a current position on LinkedIn? We kind of touched on this a little bit. Absolutely. But you have to do it in a strategic way.
So there is a prior Mom Project webinar that we did on,
which one?
It's something about
The gap.
making the most of your gap years.
Yeah.
I think that it was a slight misnomer on our part because it's really not doing it now, but looking back and making the most in terms of job currency for your gap years. So you can look that up on the Mom Project YouTube channel. But the short answer is absolutely. The thing I do love about LinkedIn is that their experience section just says experience. And then there's another one that says volunteer experience, but the top one just says experience, not professional. So you will put that information in there very boldly in that section to account for those years or for part of those years. And you're going to focus on those things that you've done that are relevant to the work that you want to do. So you might have been a library volunteer stacking books, unless you want to work in a warehouse for, Amazon, you're probably not going to put that on there because stacking books is not a key trait for the work that you want to do. You're going to focus on those things that show the skills that you want to replicate in your work. And that other video will really help talk you through that, but absolutely. And it should also be on your resume.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so these two were similar.
Oh, let me say one more thing.
Well,
however, if you have current work experience, even if it's just part-time, you can then take that volunteer experience and put it on LinkedIn on the volunteer experience side. The caveat is this: if I, as a recruiter or hiring manager, look at Katie Mack's LinkedIn page and see she hasn't worked since 2010, I don't want to see that. So that's what makes the decision. If you have nothing there, then you're going to put the volunteer experience. But if you've worked even part-time, then you can put that there and put the other stuff in the volunteer experience.
Right. Okay. So these two were similar about skill set. So how to address a skill set and a job description you may not have.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, the first step is to make sure that that skill set really matters.
Right.
So it used to be back in the dinosaur days when I was hiring my first job, it was you wrote out the job description freehand. It wasn't like a menu of stuff you were collecting and boxes you could click. So what ended up happening was the job descriptions were much more succinct and they really focused on the things that I actually needed. You will now see a job description that is asking HR managers to be able to create pivot tables in Excel, which is completely something they will never do, ever. But why not put it there? Because wouldn't that be cool if we had somebody who was like that financially savvy? So you need to use your own discernment to go through these job descriptions and say, what really matters? Look at what they say.
And do your homework.
Yeah, and do your homework.
So talk to somebody who's working in HR currently
Yeah.
and find out, are you really using pivot tables? Is that something that you do? You want to check those things out and do your homework around
Right.
that.
So assuming you meet, and this is an interesting statistic. If a woman looks at a job description, she will only apply for the job statistically if she meets 90% of the job criteria. Depending on whose stats you believe, for men, it's 40 or 50%. They're getting more jobs because of that. Nobody expects, especially now with point and click job descriptions, nobody expects the candidate to come through with everything.
Right.
And 80% of every hiring decision is, do I like you? Mm-hmm. Actually, when Kelley and I first met, I was like not even thinking of working with someone else. My other company was on its way out and I was kind of like, oh, let's do this. And I just liked her. We were both speaking at an event. She's like, we need to work together. I was like, all right, what are we gonna do? We're gonna figure something out because we need to work together.
Yeah.
But it's true. 80% of it is, do I like you? Right. I know it sounds like, companies are using all kinds of technical tools to try to screen you and analyze you, but so much of it is this. So as a hiring manager, I will overlook the nice to haves. I will overlook even some of the maybe more requisite skills if I know that you have the capacity to learn them. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to give up if I don't like you. Yeah. If I don't like you, I don't want you.
Right. All right. And what we're also finding with our students is with long gaps, is that maybe if that particular position that they interviewed for was not something that, that there was a skill gap that needed to be filled, the person that is interviewing them likes them so much, they find them something
That's right.
within the company.
That's
so
right.
that conversation that you're having and that interview that you're having on that particular day, you know, that might be just for the next opportunity. And now they remember you and they like you and they think, gosh, I got to make something work for this woman because she has so much to offer.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because another thing you can do you want to stop this?
I don't know.
So
Yeah.
just
Okay.
stop the show.
Sorry, everybody.
It's okay.
Okay.
So another thing you can think about, and this is along the lines of what you said, is there are all these returnship programs around. We have students who've gone into Oracles and into Fidelities, and they're great, but they're pretty selective. And by selective, I mean they really like people who have very short gaps and who worked in their company or in their industry.
Right.
They're not really interested in me who took 15 years off and worked at a competitor or not even in the industry.
Right.
That doesn't mean that you're not a candidate for a returnship or an internship. You get something you can negotiate on your own. So to Kelley's point, if you've developed a good relationship with the hiring manager, and you could be so bold to say, look, I know I don't have all of the technical skills here, but I'm feeling this great connection. You know that I understand your work, and it seems to me like I've done a pretty good job of convincing you I do it well. Maybe what we could do is create a new kind of arrangement. Maybe I come in for the first 4 months at a lower rate and I'm learning. And, you know, I'll take some of the technology learning off on my own, but I think it might make you more comfortable if I learned a little bit more about how MRPs work now, management resource planning. It's been a while. I get it. So you can do that. You can negotiate for those kinds of things. You don't have to wait for the Mom Project or iRelaunch or somebody to come to say, here's a returnship, apply. You're actually better off if you're creating it yourself.
Right. Right.
Okay.
Katie, were there any other questions?
Yes. Well, first of all, I have to shout out, there's someone who's currently working with you guys that's joining us today. So yeah, Kelley S in California. And she said it's been
Kelly. Oh, hi, Kel.
So she's here and said you guys have been life-changing. But we also
Kelly. Oh my gosh, she was just on a call with us.
Yes.
Kelley, you weren't sick of us already?
And then another question came in that was pretty interesting. So if I'm older than my potential boss, or if I once had a position at the level that he or she is at now, how do I speak about it, address that?
Yes.
This comes up.
And that's we did a webinar for you guys on ages, and
I think it was the first one we did, Katie, last year.
That's a really good one. We actually talked through that. So there are lots of euphemisms for you're too old. One of them is you're overqualified, you're right. So the best way to handle it, again, is just openly and honestly. And if you can instill a little bit of humor, that helps too.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I can play it out. Look, Kelley, I understand, you know what, I mean, this would be exaggerating, but you know, I could be your mother. I totally get it. And I
exaggerating. No, I'm just
I could see why you'd wonder why I'd want this junior level job, because I had it before, but it's really all I want. I actually worked at a higher level before, but taking this time off, caring for my family has really shifted my priorities. And I'm not really looking for that anymore. I kind of like check that box. If I look at what really, and I've spent some time thinking about this, what really matters to me is making a day-to-day impact,
right?
Really doing work that I love. I mean, yes, could I do the more broad scope work? Yes, but I just don't want to do that. I really want to work just on messaging because it's what I love to do. I'm in a financial position now where that's enough for me. And I guess the way I look at it for you is that you're going to get someone who gets it at a higher level, but only wants to work at this level.
Right.
And another thing that's really powerful to say is I've turned jobs down for that kind of position. It's just not what I want.
Right.
So acknowledging it. And sometimes if you can make a joke about your age, we have one of our students, Verna, who's from Michigan, and she's 24, she's been out for 24 years, I think. She just got a job at Waymo, which is Google's electric car company. Okay. You know how she got it? Tell me how she got it.
Her son.
Her son is working there. She networked with her 24-year-old son.
Yep.
And she just said, just please bring my resume in. Just give it to somebody. And he, you know what? I think it was a condition of him having room and board.
Yeah.
And he did it. And she got the job. And she just embraced it. And she was, instead of hiding, she was just, when the recruiter said, how'd you find us? My son works here. He works in finance. I'm looking to work in operations.
Yep. And she is amazing. And that company is going to benefit from her experience.
Mm-hmm.
And her, not just her experience professionally, but her experience in being a mother, and
she did some really cool gig projects and volunteer work.
Like, they're going to get so much more from an employee like Verna because of the breadth and depth of who she is.
But part of it took Verna a long time to get there.
Yep.
Part of it is just being confident. I was very playful with Kelley. I'm not 30 years old.
Right.
Big deal.
Right.
And with Roseanne, who was the one that we mentioned with the micro preemies, she's 50 and she's working on a team of 30-year-olds and she's a manager.
Yes.
And she's just having fun with it.
Yes.
And
what that team is going to gain from having Roseanne on it is, that's not something you can even quantify.
Oh yeah, let me give you one more tip.
Yeah.
This is one more that I love. So one of the things that I teach as on the corporate side is multi-generational workplaces, which is kind of where they are. Right now, for the first time in history, 5 generations working together, it'll never change. So if you're really going to be effective, and from a selfish perspective, you need to understand all of those generations because they're all your customers. So one great little line to use when you're interviewing, especially if you're interviewing with somebody who's young, or if you are in any way diverse, so female, a person of color, a person of a different sexual orientation, or older, you say something like, you know what, Kelley, one of the things that brought me here to this company is I love your mission. It's so clear that you guys are looking to hire really diverse workforces. Now, this is if I'm talking especially to like a 30-year-old white man. I love this about your company.
AKA maybe one of her children.
Yeah, well, no, they're not that old. But anyway, yeah, but like talking to somebody who's younger and white and male and really reminding them, this is your corporate culture. And this is one of the reasons I'm here. Right. And then all of a sudden they're like, oh God, yeah, boy, I better like watch it. Because I'm like, I don't want to discriminate because I'm not supposed to discriminate because we're supposed to be
or not even
diverse teams.
Maybe they don't even go down that rabbit hole. Maybe it's just you're enlightening them.
Yeah.
That like, you should stand behind your word. And I am actually somebody who's letting you know that it matters. When that's your word, it matters. And it matters because you are speaking to someone like me.
And you're also just showing that confidence. Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anything else?
No, this is wonderful. I mean, as always, so many wonderful gems dropped. The 1-2 close by far, like, I feel like you've talked about that in a past session. And even me, I'm always like, remember to like ask the question, regardless if it's an interview or not, but like to keep the conversation going and like know where you stand. I think that's so powerful and such a flex move you could do like in real time. So
but if you practice it, it rolls off your tongue.
Yeah.
I mean, in your job, you could use it when you're talking about community partnerships.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I absolutely love it. I feel like that's such a gem, but all of this so powerful, so helpful. And I hope everybody here today got a lot out of this. Again, we'll be following up with some great stuff from Susan and Kelley, so how you can get in touch, some goodies from them, and then also the recording. So yeah, just thanks everyone for joining. Thanks Susan and Kelley, as always, for bringing all of your wisdom and insight and expertise. And yeah, we're excited to do something again with you all very soon.
Thank you. We love working with the Mom Project. We hope to connect with you guys online. Hope to see some of you at our info session and just kind of hear out from some of our students about what it's like working with us.
Great. Thanks, everybody. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, Katie. Thanks,
Bye.
Ariana.